Welcome to the show, and with me is Rebecca Ondove, and she is from Montana. She came all the way out here. You know, you have really done a lot with mules, with horses, and you were doing many trails and trips and saw many miracles for 15 years. But what is it that you actually ended up doing with all that God has been teaching you?
Well, it started in 1992. It seems like God always asked me to do the impossible. Has He ever asked you to do the impossible?
Yeah, he has. And you're like, no way.
That's it.
Yes.
That was my response. And I know it's because that way you know it's Him. It's because without Him, we're not doing what He wants. In 1992, I walked out to the mailbox one day. It was in the winter. I was working in the mountains from May through December. So it was about March, I suppose. And I got a Guidepost magazine, so I flipped it open, and I'm walking back to the house because I loved Guidepost magazine. It was inspirational stories. I mean, what's better to read than that? So I'm walking back to the house, and the page I flipped open to said, if you have a story to tell, submit a manuscript. And God told me, submit a manuscript. And I went, oh my gosh, I'm not going to submit a manuscript to that. God, you don't know who I am. So here I am telling my Creator. That's where I was, though, in my walk with God, and He had so much grace. I told Him, no, every paper I've ever typed my whole life has been typed in black. It's come back red with corrections all over it. I am not going to do that. Besides, somebody's going to read it. If I write something, somebody's going to read it, and I'm personal. Not that I have anything to hide, but yeah. I'm very personal. I live in the woods, and these things are very special to me. So I closed the magazine, and I set it down, and over the next couple months, God finally got a megaphone, and He put it next to my spirit. He's saying, write a manuscript. And I'm going, no, I don't want to. Well, He kept on doing that. The night before it was due, I sat down at the computer, I typed out a manuscript, I put it in an envelope, posted it the day it was due with the words, don't ask me to write again. I did it for you, God, but don't ask me to do it again. So immediately Guidepost called me and they said, you won, and I was breathless, but not with excitement. They thought it was excitement because people had tried for years to win this competition. I was breathless with fear. I was going into totally unknown. When I got there, I discovered there were 5,400 manuscripts submitted. Then I found out later on that mine tied for top. Now that is God, that's not me. And so together, God and I have been a team, and we've put together all kinds of stories of my adventures in the backcountry. And the best part is I love horses, and that's what I get to write about.
You get to write about horses.
Horses.
Because once you won that, it was like a whole new can of worms had been opened for you. It just would go from there, right?
That's a good description. That's exactly how I felt, that I was in a bunch of worms.
Yes.
I had to learn to appreciate what God had given me and the gift that He had given me. Oftentimes God hands you a gift and you're going, it's really not what I want to do. I really don't want to sit down and write. I would rather be out riding my horses than writing. But what I learned is that is the flesh side of me. The spirit side of me only gets satisfied when I'm at the computer doing what God wants me to do, and that's writing those stories.
Wow. Now you have different stories about what you're doing, and we actually have one of your stories published by Harvest House on a clip that we're going to look at right now. welcome back to the show. And with me is Rebecca Ondoff, and you just saw a clip of Horse Tales from Heaven. Now, what is it that inspired you to write this book?
The biggest thing in this book is that God wants us to share our testimonies of what's happened and how great He is and the wonderful thing that He does. And that's what this book is filled with adventures where God has rescued me. I'm the one who makes all the mistakes, and God's the Redeemer. And that's the traditional theme, is God's love for each one of us. He created each one of us with a very special purpose, and then He leads us along this incredible path. And it's my story of meeting grizzly bears. I got stuck in a 240,000 acre forest fire I never should have lived through.
Well, wait a minute. What was that about? Can you give me a little more detail on that?
Well, it was a year where there were fires that were burning in the wilderness area where we were taking horseback trips. And they had burned all summer, and a lot of land had burned. It was a mosaic burn, which means that some of it burns and some of it stays green. But it was at the beginning of when they were starting to study forest fires. They had suppressed them for so long, the Forest Service didn't really understand the fire activity at that time. And what happened is there was a moment in time that it was I guess the telling moment, where the fire created so much heat across the land that it had burned that it drew the jet stream down, and the winds picked up. It grabbed that fire and it shot it between 55 and 65 miles an hour. And I was in the backcountry with 4 other guys. We were setting up hunting camp at the time, and we were surrounded by fire. All of a sudden, everything was on fire. And we watched 200 to 400 foot flames every evening. At the time, we were still in a little patch of green, and we knew that it was too dangerous to stay in the green, so we went into the fire, into the burn, because that's the only safe place where there wasn't enough fuel left for a hot burn again. And so we fought fire to stay in the fire, and we went to where our next camp was going to be, and we started rebuilding it because the fire had gone through there. Even though the ground was still on fire, we started rebuilding the camp that we were eventually going to be in. And so we were...
Did you have horses with you? Because horses, I've heard, get spooked really easy. They get upset really easy. Just give them those kind of flames. I'm sure there was some challenges there.
There were incredible challenges. We actually, when we got to the area where we stayed, we turned the horses and mules loose. And it was country they had been in before, so they went up in the mountains and navigated the fire and the grass the best they could. And we knew that that was the safest thing for them. Well, it came time that things had settled down. We were still watching 200 and 400 foot flames shooting off different parts of the forest at night, and we knew that we had to get out of there at this point in time. We weren't sure where the fire was going, and our boss came in. He risked his life to ride in. We were 17 miles in the backcountry to tell us what direction to go out. It was like tossing a coin. We weren't sure which way would be better or worse. By the time we found the horses, we got saddled up, we loaded what gear we had on the horses and started down the trail. It was almost dark. And so you had the glow of the fire all around you as you were going down the trail. But we ended up on some narrow trails, and I didn't know anything about fires or fire activity. And this is how incredible God is to rescue you when you don't even know what to pray. He's right there. The trees that had burned oftentimes had fallen on top of each other, and there were spots where there were 26 trees piled on top of each other, and we had a crosscut saw. We didn't, because it was wilderness, didn't have a chainsaw. So each one of us, of the 4 of us, had to take turns on the end of the crosscut to cut through all 26 trees so we could get the horses down the trail. And you had to wear gloves because the trees were so hot. Then we would go across the trail, and the river was straight down below you, a couple hundred feet, and then the trail was maybe 3 or 4 feet wide, and then it was straight up another cliff. And what I didn't realize is that fire goes down inside the trees and burns down the pitch pockets. You know how pitch burns so hot?
Yeah.
Burns down the pitch pockets, and it goes down through the roots, and then it burns through the pine needles underground. And it smolders, and it waits for oxygen because it needs fuel, heat, and oxygen for a fire to take off. So there were all these fires that had gone underground and were burning underground, and we were on these narrow trails, and I was in the lead on a horse that was very spooky, and I was riding along, and it's pitch black except for the glowing spots where all this fire was around us. And all of a sudden, the whole trail underneath me gave way, and it went into one of these fire pits where the fire had burned down the tree through the roots and had hollowed out underneath the trail. And if it everything, you know, part of the trail went all the way down to the river. And so my horse was scrambling. As we broke through that top crust, it gave oxygen to that fire, and the flames came out around the hooves of my horse, all the way across my horse's body and over my head. They were so tall. Well, my horse is scrambling to get out of there. He doesn't want to be in the fire. I don't want to be in the fire. So he jumps out. Well, now we have a problem. I'm on this side of the fire. The trail is so narrow you can't bypass it, and it's flaming. It's just like this big pot of boiling flames. And I've got 3 guys behind me, and they are leading mules. And
And you talked to me in a couple of shows ago about mules are the ones that want safety and protection all the time.
they do.
Not a good moment.
It was not a good moment.
No.
And the place that had hollowed out was probably about 4 feet across. It was just shooting flames. And those guys had to jump their horses and mules over, knowing that if their horse missed on the other side, they were going down into the river, but there was no room to turn around and go back. There was nothing to go back to.
Oh.
And our whole goal that night was to get back to the ranch. And we knew if we could just get the 17 miles to the end of the road, there would be a vehicle waiting for us. We were told there would be a vehicle waiting for us at the end of the road. And we could take that vehicle and the horses and go back to the ranch.
Now, is that a moment that you were praying?
Oh my gosh, yes. But you're in shock. You don't know what to pray.
Huh.
And you just pray for protection. You just try to take your mind and go someplace else. It was a horror, like a horror movie. And I would walk down the trail maybe another quarter of a mile or a mile, and my horse would fall through again. And we would be in another fire pit, and my horse would be scrambling to get out of it. And then the guys behind me would be jumping their horses across it. Oh. And all I could think about, it's just like us sometimes when we're going through challenges in our life, all we can think about is God. Okay, we've got God at the end, let's just focus on Him, and everything's going to be okay. The only problem is I was dealing with man. And what happened is there was no vehicle at the end of the road because they refused to allow something to be left because there was too much fire going on and the vehicle would have blown up because of the fuel in it. So at 1 o'clock in the morning when we got to the end of the road after cutting trees and we were totally exhausted, we're black from head to toe with the char. Our horses are freaked out. I had to get off and walk my horse most of the way because he was totally unmanageable. There was no vehicle. And so we had to ride our horses, I think it was another 6 miles to the ranch, across country. All I could think of is a hot shower. I want to get this stuff washed off me. I want to get in a different place in my head. I want some place that's safe, where it's not going to be on fire. And we got to the ranch, and they had evacuated the whole ranch.
Oh, no.
Because of the fire danger. There wasn't a spoon in a drawer. There wasn't a towel in the bathroom. There wasn't a bar of soap. And by this time, we were so exhausted that we turned the horses and mules loose, and we went and we laid down on the linoleum floor and fell asleep.
Wow.
And we felt totally deserted. And what I learned from that story is there's so many times in life when man lets you down.
They do.
And you feel so totally deserted, like there's nobody pulling for you, but always know that Jesus is there.
Wow. And is this one of the stories that's in your book?
It is. It's in Horse
your book,
Tales from Heaven.
Oh, that is just a must read. And where is it that people could come to? Because I'm sure people are interested in do you have a website that they could find more information about your books? What is it?
MontanaHorseGal.com.
Montana Horse, of course. Had to be something like that. MontanaHorseGal.com. So if people, because I'm just listening you with just full, what is it, out of breath basically, just listening and how God is keeping to help you, to work with you and protect you and teach you lesson after lesson through some really hard circumstances. But before we say anything more, because I want to more about your other book, Heaven, as well. Before we do that, we will be right back. I'm just so excited to be able to share with you that God has a plan for you. He wants you to love your life and to live it abundantly. And that's what my passion is for you. I want you to love your life, to enjoy your life, and to see the benefits that God has for you in mind. He doesn't just want to leave you where you're at, but He wants to make a difference. And that is what Love Your Life Ministries is all about, to help you grow and draw closer to God, for you to have a great life that totally focuses on what God wants for you. And guess what happens when you do? Your life will change, not for the worst, but for the better. It is going to be a blast. Welcome back to the show, and with me is Rebecca Ondoff, and we are talking about her book, Heaven. And if you have been listening with me through the first half of the show about these incredible stories, that I am just like, no way, and there is much more to come for you. So I would just want to let you know, it's like, enjoy every moment of it just the way I am. Rebecca, thank you for coming to us all the way from Montana, and thank you for sharing with us such incredible depth, because what I like about you is you're real. You're not a fake Christian. You are authentic and you are real, and you're sharing that with us today. Now, could you share with me a little bit about your book?